a point of agricultural use, as a point of community development, as we'll hear about a little bit more today, and as opportunity for tourism, as you know, is not only a treasure for the state, but a national focus for tourism. And we want, and then of course, we want that to all be done in a way that's going to be protective of health. And we've got our partner here from the health department, Dr. Smith. Thank you for being here today. So with that, I'm serving as a co-chairman along with Executive Director Bruce Holland from the Natural Resources Commission, and we have others here today, and I guess we can start the meeting. We have an agenda before us, I believe has been handed out over here, that we'd like to just welcome you and each of the agency directors that serve on this committee. As the governor commissioned us, he is seeking agency actions, but also more importantly, agency review of partnerships and studies that can educate and inform non-regulatory opportunities in the watershed. And so I think with that, we wanted to start out with a few report outs from each agency about things that might be going on or opportunities or good news for the Buffalo watershed area. And but before that, I'll let each of our directors introduce themselves. Our current, I know we've got a few fill-ins, so I'll introduce those to the members of the public that are here today. But if I'll just let you self-introduce yourself, and then I'll see if Director Holland has any opening remarks as well before we move into the formal agenda. So.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Crow, Director of the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission.
I'm Cynthia Edwards. I'm the Deputy Secretary of the Arkansas Agriculture Department. I'm filling in for Secretary West Ford.
I'm Bruce Holland. I'm the Executive Director of the Arkansas Natural Resources Commission, and through our agency is where we're doing the watershed management plans being facilitated by our folks. This is, I think, the 10th out of 59 in the state, just for information. And we look forward in our agency to adding as many of those as we can in the next few years so we can better manage our natural resources of the state.
Dr. Nate Smith, I'm the Director of the Arkansas Department. Dr. Nate Smith, I'm Director of the Arkansas Department of Health.
And I know Kane Webb, who is Director of Parks and Tourism, who planned on being here. I don't believe he's able to be here at this moment. He had some commitments that came up at the legislature unexpectedly, and he had indicated he would try to make arrangements for an alternative representative, but we'll move forward with the meeting and we'll make sure we share our information with him and get his input as we go forward. So with that,
for Shelby Johnson of GIS.
oh, I'm sorry, there you are. Where's Shelby?
No, he's not here.
Oh, he's not here, okay. Yeah, he also had indicated he would try to be here. So with that, since this is not a voting commission per se, I'm not sure we have to seek a quorum, but I will tell you that these fellow agency peers and directors have been very helpful to me, and I know to Director Holland as we talk about the Buffalo River, but you know, in being available to have conversations and ideas. So we look forward to their input when they can be available to be part of the meeting. We have a number of special meetings, but I'm going to turn it over now. Director Holland, do you have any other welcoming comments before I move into the executive discussion? Okay. We do set up some time for agency report outs. Why don't we do that first? I guess, although it's a little bit awkward on the agenda not to do an approval of our minutes, but we'll go on and do agency report outs now, and then we'll go through the kind of business portion of our action committee following that. So I can begin with ADQ's report out, or Jeff, would you like to start?
I'd be happy.
We'll just take it left to right on our end.
Thank you, Becky. Once again, it's a privilege for our agency to be able to participate in this group and the important activities going on in this very important resource. I can report, not to steal a lot of Alex and Scott's thunder, but we are participants in the unpaid roads program, and a lot of that those resources go to this watershed, and we believe that's one of a very important program. Excited for those to be able to share a little more information about that today. But our agency does contribute $150,000 annually to that. Additionally, we believe we found some resources that has come through our foundation, Arkansas Game and Fish Foundation, earmarked for a water quality project, and we've identified the unpaid road program is where we would like to place that money. So we're excited, hope to have more to report on that at our next meeting. As far as activities in the watershed, we have partnered with the local conservation districts and purchased a feral hog trap, which has been used extensively in the watershed. Director Holland correctly noted last meeting that it was the feral hogs do have an impact on the water quality and a very negative impact on the resource. In addition to that, we have removed 351 hogs in that area, and there's plenty more where those came from, unfortunately. But we also work cooperatively with the National Park Service, managing about 250 acres of open land. It's a riparian corridor along the water courses. It's maintained to protect the stream bank integrity, and conservation practices include nutrient management, grass buffers, minimal tillage, and crop rotation. So that's a cooperative effort that we're doing with local farmers and the National Park Service. Additionally, our enforcement division works cooperatively for about the 134 miles of river, 135 miles of river through the national park, especially during this season whenever recreation on the rivers at all-time high, making sure we have compliance with the class container laws, with the litter enforcement, and all the other varieties, all the human activity that could have a negative impact on the resource. And we worked extensively doing that, 35 special operations over the last 3 years, and many more to come. But we're excited to be a part of this effort, and look forward to future opportunities to partner in an even more significant way. Thank you.
I don't have an extensive action report from the Arkansas Agriculture Department, but wanted to let you know that Secretary Ward and the department are very excited about being part of this group and contributing how we can. Agriculture is our state's largest industry, and we represent a $20 billion value to the state every year, but we understand we all have to work as a partner, and I think we've partnered in some way or another with every member of this commission previously. So we're looking forward to working together again that way. We do have our regulatory agencies, the Livestock and Poultry Commission, the Forestry Commission, and our plant board staff that's in the field every day across the state, including the Buffalo River area, and we just are excited to have them out there and being our eyes and ears on the ground and help any way we can. Thank you so much.
I'll let Tony Ramick give the book of the presentation from the Arkansas Natural Resources Commission today, but there's a couple of things I would like to mention. First of all, as regards Secretary Ward, he's got a very good reason not to be here today. He is on active duty deployed, I think, in Jordan. So we want to think about him and all the military folks that are serving, so we can be here today conducting this business. Another point that I'd like to make is during the last legislative session, there was, piggyback on Director Crow's comments with regards to the feral hogs, there's been a task force set up, which he and I are both going to be a part of. And so hopefully we can come up with some ways there to help eradicate the feral hog problem in the state, and obviously that would be a benefit to this watershed area as well.
All right. I may skip to you, Dr. Smith, and then come back to me, and I'll wrap it up, and then we'll follow the rest of the agenda. So.
When later in the agenda I talk about the swim beach program, I think that would be a logical time to present some of the E. coli monitoring data. So I'll wait until then. I have a few slides that will help to project that. I've also for the members of the committee have given a handout, 2 handouts reviewing some of the E. coli monitoring data, which I'll refer to when we go through that, if that's okay.
Very helpful, thank you so much. Well, just from from ADQ's perspective to the rest of you, just to give you a flavor of things that are going on with respect to the Buffalo as well as the public that are here attending. This summer, our water quality group has initiated a continuation of monitoring of E. coli concentrations. In fact, in the Mill Creek watershed, which has been this is continued from 2016, was a study. Last summer, we sampled 12 various sites throughout the Mill Creek watershed. And so this summer, sampling is expected to continue from May 1st to September 30th, and this is considered a critical season, I guess, as we look at that. The first 2017 samples were collected last week, and obviously we want to work this in concert with the health department, so any way we can inform our work, we'd love to work with you, Dr. Smith, to make sure that we're not being duplicative or necessarily missing anything as well. We will do an evaluation of that E. coli data following the critical season. So I believe the data for last year indicated favorable results for most of the creek, and we can think that was reported on last time. We also are working on what we call assessment methodology. I know Sarah is here in the room who's leading that charge for us in our planning section of the Water Division. One of the processes that we go through on a biennial process under our mandates under the Clean Water Act is to do assessment of stream quality, water quality, and to evaluate data that's available to us. And of course, that data has to meet certain standards, data quality assurance standards, when it's collected and provided. But one of the things that we wanted to do was go through our methodology that we would use to evaluate the data that we have to determine how we use that data in terms of making decisions. And specifically, we've been focusing on assessment methodology in this review of around continuous data, and that historically we've collected like discrete data samples, or what we call grab samples for the most part. However, USGS has been collecting some continuous dissolved oxygen data now, and that's taking a reading every 15 minutes in a stream. Of course, it's important where the data is taken and how we can, whether all that data can be used or not, but we want to look at that. So we ended up with a large volume of data as we went through the review, this last review, and we determined that we had not really fully gone through an evaluation of what was a proper way to evaluate that data in terms of its meaning, and what was proper from a scientific basis and from a peer review, how to evaluate that data. We are not the only state going through this process. Several states around us, in fact, are going through the same review of how to evaluate continuous data. And in fact, one of the efforts, I think, by Sarah's group is to look at how other states are approaching this evaluation. And there's been a work group formed by stakeholders to have input on how to assess continuous data, and we appreciate the contributions of that stakeholder work group. They've been meeting with us. And for the first time, we've made this a very public process in terms of how we propose, and we will ultimately propose an assessment methodology for comment for other input as well beyond the stakeholder group. But we want to make sure that we're getting as good a science into the process as possible. So in an effort to use all the available data, a methodology is being evaluated now. We're currently looking at how it compares to other states. We do see some variation. So unfortunately, there's not one answer, one size fits all on this. So we want to be careful, we want to be thoughtful, we want to make sure that the results are meaningful at the end of the day, because we know it is important as we make regulatory decisions as well as other decisions about stream quality and the status of it in terms of what whether it attains a standard or not. And so we will be using, hopefully, this updated methodology that we will go through public comment on as part of our 2018 decision-making process. So we have a few months still to be able to fully develop this and go out for comment on it before we do our final recommendations in 2018, but it's getting close, so we want to move forward on that. So you'll be hearing more about that. Of course, from a regulatory perspective, our permitting group in the Water Division has been actively working on a permit that was issued for the CNH Hog Farm. Permit comments have been received on that permit. This is a non-discharge permit, which is a state permit. It replaces what used to be a general permit that the farm was constructed under. We determined as an agency that the general permit that was in existence, which was due to expire, was not being fully utilized by the industry or helpful necessarily in administrating the program particularly for CAFO. So and as a result of the fact that the federal government, who had encouraged us to develop that permit, had in fact modified their approach and never finalized the general permit, we determined we would let that permit terminate and not renew it. So at this point, we are reviewing a permit application, which has been submitted under what we call Regulation 5, which is a state program or state regulation related to land application and animal operations, I guess, in the state. And it's a long-standing permitting program, and we have a number of facilities that are subject to permits that have been issued under Regulation 5. We want to go through that permit in a very deliberate way. A permit hearing was held in Jasper on March 7th, and we received a high volume of interest, I think is an understatement, of the type of comments that we've gotten on this permit. It's of importance to the state. We know there's a lot of folks watching. We had a lot of interest from out-of-state commenters on this permit. So we want to weight those comments. We want to understand the technical nature where we're submitted, and we're going through that evaluation. The comment period was actually extended due to the volume of interest until April 6th. So this has been identified as a priority for our agency. I have dedicated a special team across the agency tapping into technical competencies and resources beyond our traditional water permitting resources to make sure that we address this permit in a full, efficient, and scientific way. A lot of work to do, but we are making progress, and we will inform a final decision based on this entire review process, including the comment period. So as the governor said, I think in his public comments, we are hoping to make a decision that will be informed by science and the law. Obviously, that is what we're asked to do and I'm asked to do as a director. So given that, some of you sit on my commission, so that's probably all I should say about that, but I wanted to make you aware of it, or make the public aware of it, that we are working diligently toward a final decision that we believe we can support from the law and science. So that's where we are at ADQ. There's a number of other studies going on, and look forward to hearing more about what's going on at the health department as well. Wanted to move quickly into the executive discussion. Before you have some minutes, I believe, from our first meeting, January 17th meeting, our meeting. I think you do. I'm looking for mine, but I guess we do. Okay, well, you got it. And of course, I've had a chance to read them already, but I wanted to see if anyone sees any concerns or has any comments about it. If not, I would be happy to entertain a motion to accept an approval of these minutes to stand as a good record of our discussions in January. So it's been moved. Any second? Second, Dr. Smith, and all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Well, with that, the second agenda item is the governor in his call for action had indicated that he sought for us to have meetings face-to-face with each of the agencies and in this action committee, I guess at a minimum a quarterly basis. Obviously, we can meet more frequently, but I know we're all very busy folks and we're working. And often we have the chances to meet each other in other opportunities anyway. But formally on this topic, we want to meet to discuss priorities about the Buffalo watershed, as well as inform a final report that we'll submit to the governor's office. And we've got staff that are working to develop that based on our discussions. So I wanted to mention the meeting dates. I think there's a calendar here that we're presenting as some suggested meeting dates to look ahead. We have some options, I guess. We looked at Tuesdays as being something that avoided some of the other commissions that we all, some of us are affected by, and I know with Kane out and Shelby, we may need to consult with them as well. But these are some of the dates that we have as an option, I guess, in third quarter and fourth quarter. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there if there was any preferred dates that those of you have, or if we want to attempt to set this offline, that's fine with me too. There's one of our partners, so we'll look forward to Shelby joining us, and appreciate your ability to join us. But I will mention that, and I probably should have discussed with Kane, I saw him this morning, but he is also looking at an ad hoc meeting of the group of those of us that are interested in potentially a float trip, as we discussed, maybe in early June. And his folks have been working to set that up with the flooding and the rain events. Obviously, some of those plans have been somewhat up in the air, and so I haven't really pinned down to a set date yet, but it is getting close, so I will ask him to give us some dates. And if those of you that are interested, I believe there's some plans sometime in early to mid-June, if your personal schedules and work professional schedules allow you to participate. But that being said, formal meetings here in Little Rock, which is what we're attempting to do to make ourselves available in the central part of the state, we'd look at perhaps July 18th, August 15th, or September 19th, and then fourth quarter, October or November, obviously December. I believe we've been trying to time it to where we can get a report out, Director Holland, on the watershed management plan. So I'm not sure if there's a date certain yet. Maybe we need to hear from Tony before we make this decision when the next meeting is scheduled. Or do you have?
Meeting scheduled? June 8th. Okay.
So I guess any of those 3 dates would be adequate.
Right.
And then you'll have a follow-up meeting to that. What would be the following after June? Is there, you don't know yet? Okay. Those are held quarterly as well, or? Okay. Well, perhaps maybe we want to target, I guess we've been trying to hit 1, 2, 3, sometime maybe mid-August or something like that, unless that hits family vacation time before school starts. I know sometimes September is easier, but does anyone have any issues with August or have a preference?
I'll be out of town those next 3 days, so that might be pushing.
Okay, so maybe July or September would be preferred then. Okay. Well, that's September. Well, it sounds like July has more unanimous votes than, well, we'll target July 18th. If there's other things that come up, obviously we'll be flexible. But for those of you in the audience, if you want to put that down as a save the date, we can at least hold it for now of July 18th. So anyway, and fourth quarter, maybe a little premature to plan, but given July, I would lean toward the October date myself, because let's avoid some of the holidays unless we need to convene to review a report at some point. We may have to do a second meeting also later in the quarter to review any details on the report that we might be putting together. So let's move on from that if everyone's okay with that. Do we need a motion to accept July as a date, or y'all okay with me just using executive authority to assign that. Okay, we'll go with that. All right. I think the next agenda item is your key priorities. There's just a reminder, I believe, a sheet here that's been presented to you about year one priorities. And the stakeholder forum, obviously with the watershed management plan, is moving well, and we'll hear about that in a minute, initiating the development of that. And I believe the third meeting, as you mentioned, is June 8th in Marshall. The final draft, well, I'm not going to steal Tony's thunder. I'll let him announce when the final draft is prepared. But I know there's been a number of participation, and it does present a bit of confusion, I believe, to the public when they attend these meetings, what the watershed management plan is versus what our action committee's purpose and mission are. So just to clarify, this is I believe, one task, or one action that our agencies are working in collaboration on around the Buffalo River. And it was initiated through a grant that we received and agreed on as agency directors to dedicate a multi-purpose, single-time grant that we received from the Environmental Protection Agency to be able to advance a watershed management plan, even ahead of any kind of regulatory driver or determination about the watershed itself. So it was a proactive effort to educate and is intended to not drive regulatory action, but in fact drive non-regulatory solutions directed to really achieve outcomes. And those outcomes can best be determined or driven if we're informed on where our actions are most meaningful. So the third objective was to identify early actions to jumpstart. We don't have to wait till we have all the science. We won't ever have all the science likely. We know science is a dynamic process when we do scientific review. So, but there are best management practices that often we can engage on, and I believe some of those are being discussed at the meetings by different entities, but also by you as agency directors, and I really applaud you, Director Crow, for the initiatives that you've taken as an agency and other agencies and the Health Department too, to get out in front of some of these early needs of the community to be able to inform better practices. So that's going for. And then I guess in report out on the prioritizing future research needs, we've not taken any action as far as I'm aware as an action committee this time about research needs, but perhaps a subcommittee formation to evaluate and prioritize research needs and data gaps would be appropriate as we wrap up this watershed management plan process. So I'd like to entertain that we consider that maybe at the next upcoming meeting to start talking about any research needs, or to at least have conversations and dialogue. And Tony, you may want to speak to that if y'all are talking about that at all in the watershed management plan process with stakeholders. And if not, if it would be helpful for us to open a dialogue about research needs and what timing might fit well with what your efforts. So you might think about that. So that's something that's, at least in my mind, that we probably do need to focus on to being able to report back to the governor on that priority. So I know that we do our own monitoring and research, but I know the state is only one partner in research, and there's a lot of well-competent scientific research that we could engage to help us better understand the watershed. Lastly, I guess those were the priorities that were laid out in the governor's action call, and we obviously want to pay attention to those. There's some metrics he had directed us to develop and respond to, and that's another conversation we want to talk about, is setting metrics, and I hope to make that a topic agenda item at the next meeting on what metrics might be appropriate for us to begin to measure in the watershed and what we think we can accomplish through our actions. So that's something I know we're doing as state agencies anyway, right? As we look at our operations to be strategic in how we deliver our services to the public. So it may fit well for us to offer maybe how we could establish some metrics as an action committee that align also with our agency metrics so that we're not being redundant or excessive and demanding on our staffs. Lastly, I guess on the agenda, well, it's not last, I guess there's two other items under executive discussion was a proposal by my staff, and I think it's an excellent idea. You may have other, I'd like to have this open for conversation, is how we communicate ideas. And I know we can communicate one-on-one quite easily, and I've found all the agency directors to be very accessible whenever we've had a question or comment about the Buffalo River. But our agency staffs have indicated that it might be helpful to have a second tier committee, interagency communications team to better interact with the community and the public. In our charter, we indicated that we would like to, as a treasured resource from a national and local level, and we see a lot of interest, obviously, at a national and local level on the Buffalo River as been exhibited just in our own regulatory actions. We want the committee meetings to provide a forum to get input on what's important. However, we don't want this to become an exercise of public input that would just be redundant to, say, a regulatory hearing. So I think in our conversations, we've talked about the fact that these presentations that we look forward to hearing them today might be a meaningful way to get input as agency directors on what actions we might want to consider and decisions we want to make. But those ideas right now are coming from ourselves, not from the public, and we'd like to generate some ideas from those that are interested on perhaps they have something they'd like to present about a study or a program that is working in a watershed that we might want to consider for the Buffalo. And this is specific to, say, a best management practice or a research program that we might want to take up as part of our specific objectives. And so the idea is to bring communications directors from all agencies together to form a subcommittee to talk about how we better relate to the public and get those ideas, including the development of a dedicated website. I know right now there's a website that was established on our website, and I believe now we have an ADQ, what we call the BBRAC website. We have a web page, which is under adq.state.ar.us, not easy words, /water/BBRI/BBRAC. Okay, we got to get better at this. So obviously we need a better communications plan, in my opinion. So I'd like to see if we can get that second tier. So if all of y'all are willing to nominate someone or have your communications director or one of your communications staff sit, I'd like to have my communications team, and I don't know who was going to lead that from our end, Donnelly or?
Yeah, it's going to be Heather and I.
Okay, well, Donnelly's in the back too. We've got Donnelly Davis back there. She may want to, you want them to coordinate through you or through Allie? Which way do y'all need to give me direction here? So
Allie's fine, and I'll work with Allie. That's
okay. All right, well, we have our policy advisor in our water division, Allie Rouse, and we can get the communication director's names and contacts. If you want to leave those in writing or send those in by email to me, I will share that with Allie and Donnelly, and we'll make the appropriate contacts to form a separate conversation about that. So in the meantime, obviously the public can access information. We're trying to post everything about our action committee on this ADQ website. And we will try to put a hot link on the first page of our website, Donnelly, to make sure that people don't have to remember this lengthy connection point. So if you can get to our ADQ website, you should be able to hot link right into the information. And anyway, but we'd like to set up a dedicated site and we believe we have the funds to support that going forward. So, but I'd like some help in who's going to design it, who's going to maintain it. It's not something that you do with just we've got to make sure it stays current. So, anybody have a concern about that before I move on? I know I'm kind of railroading this a bit, and I apologize if I'm moving fast. You got okay, good. Well, please forward that information to me, and I will make sure Angela picks it up and gets it to Allie and Donnelly to act on. That will be very helpful, I think. So now we're come to the interesting part of the meeting, the exciting part of the meeting. We have some special guests today for presentation on the unpaved road program. I don't know who's going to begin, but I'll turn it over to Scott Simon from the Arkansas Nature Conservancy, as well as Alex Johnston, Arkansas Economic Development Commission Rural Services, ADC, to present the program and how it may add value to the Buffalo watershed in the future. So thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Director Kehoe. When people visit with you all, how do they usually stand? Do they stand with their backs to you, or fronts to you, or sideways? Okay, let's do that. Yeah, sideways. Thanks. How about that?
We're behind you all the way, as they say. That's much better, Scott. Thank you.
Great. Great, thanks Director Kehoe. Thanks everybody for having me over. I'm here with Alex Johnston. She's the Director of the Division of Rural Services with the Arkansas Economic Development Commission. And we're going to tag team a little bit, so I will describe the concepts and the backgrounds about unpaved roads in Arkansas and the unpaved roads program. And then she'll describe the specifics about the application, the selection process, eligibility for the program, and counties applying. I'm with the Nature Conservancy, which is a practical on-the-ground conservation organization. We own a few thousand acres along the Buffalo in the watershed, and much of it with another group called the Buffalo River Foundation, which is a practical on-the-ground land trust. They have about a dozen conservation easements. They're growing private landowners that are interested in the river. Unpaved roads. Well, as you know, they are really the lifeblood of the rural parts of our state. I mean, they connect people to their communities, and they're really critical for agriculture, tourism, energy, timber, all of these industries. They are also a significant part of the economic benefit that each of those industries provides to our state, and particularly tourism, which is the number 2 industry in our state. And they connect people to all the great places and all the people that come visit Arkansas and bring them there. It is a substantial responsibility for the counties. So there are, of the 81,000 miles of county roads, 85% of them are unpaved, 85%. And with the increased rainfalls that we're having, the impacts on the counties are increasing, and it's really a huge responsibility and a substantial burden that they're trying to work under. Our interest is because a lot of the sediment from these roads flows into the rivers that have both our fisheries and a variety of rare species. Many of Arkansas's Ozark and Washita rivers have a fish, a mussel, a crayfish, only known from that river, nowhere else, which is interesting. But then those rivers flow into our drinking water reservoirs. With them, combined with hydropower and flood control, it's just a multi-billion-dollar economic benefit. And keeping those rivers and the reservoirs healthy is just important to all of us. And so the roads, for all the great network that they provide us, are a challenge for our water. And here's how it happens. In the top, most of our roads look like this, entrenched. And so when it rains, the water accumulates on the road, ruts it out, and then when it actually gets to the roadside ditch, it acts as a conduit directly to the creeks and the streams, and then causes our rivers and streams to be muddy and murky during rainfall events, which historically they were not like. I mean, that's really a relatively recent phenomenon, and people are noticing just the rivers are getting muddier and cloudier during rainfall. An additional particular challenge is the stream and road crossings. And so these are the pinch points where oftentimes counties, strapped for cash, put relatively undersized culverts or bridges that when it floods, can't convey the floodwaters, and so the water's got to go somewhere. It goes over the road, it goes to the side, it erodes, causing damage, which needs to be repaired, and then causing additional erosion upstream and downstream. It's usually the beginning of the erosion of the streams at these pinch points. And it's just plain a lot of sediment. Now, this is the middle fork of the Little Red River in a medium-sized rain as it flows into Greers Ferry Lake. And so, millions and millions of tons of sediment flowing into the rivers and then flowing into our reservoirs. And so it's a challenge. Interestingly, it has some other, I know this sounds like a bunch of bad news, but it gets better. Interestingly, the sediment from the roads is the beginning of the story. The rivers themselves can't process the sediment very well, and so they begin to move side to side in their floodplains to slow down, try and drop the sediment out, but then it starts causing eroding stream banks on the edges. And particularly in areas without vegetation along the river corridor. And then it's those eroding stream banks that really starts adding additional sediment. An ADQ study from 2004 in the Beaver Lake watershed identified 20% of the sediment from the ditches, 11% from construction, and 58% from the stream banks. But really make no mistake, when you see data like this, it really starts with the roads. And then that causes the stream banks to start eroding as the river tries to process all that sediment. It's got an economic cost. Fishing in our state is $750 million approximate economic benefit. And then combine that with the reservoirs, which is a multi-billion-dollar benefit that we receive as citizens from these water resources. Fortunately, there's a way to address all this. A real practical vision that many of the agencies and organizations in Arkansas developed is just to put together an unpaved roads effort that would be, just make sure I get their language right, a really practical, proactive, incentive-based partnership effort that uses the latest best management practices to improve the road quality, so we minimize erosion, minimize the sediment in the lakes and rivers, stretch county dollars farther, and just provide a better atmosphere for the driving public. And fortunately, there's a good model out there. This is not something we need to do from scratch. The state of Pennsylvania, with a lot of work from Trout Unlimited, developed an unpaved roads program several years ago. It's organized through Penn State University, the Center for Dirt and Gravel Road Studies, that does the technical part, and then county and other governments manage a grant program. Funded about $5 million a year when it started. In 2014, the legislature increased that to approximately $35 million. They have accomplished about 2,000 projects over the past few years. And there's a lot of great information. I've got some materials for you here that I can distribute afterwards, but they've got fact sheets, technical reports, field manuals for bulldozer operators or county judges. And so a lot of this, they've been very gracious in providing to us in Arkansas that we can just adapt for our needs. And their process, which we've adopted, the partnership working on this, really starts with an assessment. Looking at a particular watershed, in this case it's the watershed for Greers Ferry Lake, and mapping the unpaved roads, red, yellow, green, pretty basic. And what we have found is that oftentimes the worst stretches of really steep eroding unpaved roads might be only 5% of the whole road system, but they're contributing more than 50% of the sediment. And the county judges tell us this because they're the hot spots they just keep going back to after every big rain and flood. And then from that, once we know where the hot spots are, the partnership developed a series of demonstration projects. So we can test the techniques, see how they work in Arkansas, customize them, and then hold workshops and meetings with county judges and industry leaders who work on roads so we could all learn together. And here's an example of one of those projects, just so you can see. On the upper left is a typical unpaved road in the Ozarks. Doesn't look like it's particularly eroding. It's relatively steep. But the road profile itself, as you can see on the left-hand side here, is entrenched. So when it rains, the road becomes a stream. The ditch itself, when the road when the water does get into the ditch, doesn't have any culverts, and it's connected directly to the stream, which flows into a river, which flows into Bridge Ferry Lake. So the project was to add material, raise the roadbed up enough so that culverts could be installed and turnouts could be installed to direct as much of that water off the road quickly and then into the woods. And then here's the completed project. What was really fascinating was measuring the impact. And we use a Forest Service modeling program called WEP, Water Erosion Prediction Project. And this is where the counties could really see the benefit. On the road surface itself, WEP estimated an 80% reduction in sediment from 17,700 pounds of erosion per year in the previous road to approximately 3,600. That's just money. That's 80% of material and staff time that they don't have to spend. On the water quality portion of it, about a 94% reduction in the amount of sediment that left the ditch and made it into the river. So the projects are working. And they really great partnership formed around it. It was led by the Arkansas Association of Counties, Farm Bureau, many of your agencies, Natural Resource Commission, Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, and then the Division of Rural Services at the Arkansas Department of Economic Development Commission manages the program as a partner. A bill was introduced during the previous legislative session 2 years ago. It had nearly unanimous support from the legislators. Governor Hutchinson has been a great proponent and supporter, signed it into law. And it's been working. Managed by the Division of Rural Services, we're just finishing our second year of grants. And how it works, there was no general revenue funding in the first few years. The Game and Fish Commission very graciously contributed $150,000 a year for 5 years. Private supporters, people who use the rivers and the roads, contributed to the Nature Conservancy a couple of $100,000 for us to provide funding for the program. And then the counties, for every project that's approved, provide a 50% match. So $500,000 in total projects in the first year and $500,000 in this year. One of the neat components about the program is the addition of the University of Arkansas Center for Transportation Training, the Highway Department, work together to provide the training for people who apply for the funding in other interested counties. And then the trainer also includes somebody from the Division of Rural Services and the Nature Conservancy. Nearly 100 road professionals went through the workshops in the first year, and they were really, I think, enjoyed seeing the practical techniques and understanding the cost benefit over the long term. The projects themselves are a little more expensive than if the counties were doing it in their previous way, but they found that they pay for themselves in just a couple of years. And they certainly save in headaches during these major storm events. Wanted to give you a case study about one project that's particularly germane this month. This was a County Road 20 in Calhoun County. Was a project in 2016. Prior to the improvements, during a flood, this is in a tributary along the Ouachita River, the water would run across the road, eroding the road, as you can see in the upper right corner, and then carrying thousands of tons of sediment into the streams and into the river. The county judge, Floyd Nutt, submitted an application. He's been a great advocate about the idea. And here he is on the lower right explaining it to some of his staff and some of the adjacent county roads crews in other counties. And the project involved raising the roadbed more than 5 feet, adding culverts underneath the raised roadbed to connect both sides of the floodplain, the judge creatively included both an Arkansas Unpaved Roads Program project here in combination with a bridge replacement with the Department of Emergency Management. So really creative doing both of them. And then this spring in May, it was tested. So the Ouachita River crested at 35 feet. At 31 feet, the water would have been running over the road, would have resulted in closing the road and erosion previously. But this time, at the crest, the water did not go over the road, it went underneath. There's no damage, so no county staff spending time on this place. They're working somewhere else, and the road was available and safe for the public to traverse. So we're all pretty excited about it. The program's working, the counties and the county judges appreciate it, and we're able to do just a few projects a year, but we think it's really got great potential to protect and benefit the buffalo. And Alex, if you want to come up and describe the specifics of the program and how it works, I'll get your presentation now.
Thank you for having us again, and thank you to Scott for giving the background. Our main part of this program is administering the program, setting the rules and regulations, accepting the grants, doing the training, and giving out the funds once we select those who are receiving funding. Scott kind of gave you most of the background information, but in fiscal year 2018, we are expecting a little over $300,000 to give out in grant dollars. This is matched, so we are leveraging those dollars by the counties who are selected for funding. And I'm not sure, I lost my train of thought, but you can apply for up to $75,000 for this grant. And as the program grows, we hope to up that number. What we've seen here in the first 2 years is that that is a good number. We were afraid at first that maybe counties would need more money than this, but we've had a lot of grants, 40,000, 50,000, not as many capping out at the $75,000 mark. So we are able to fund a few more programs. And I know that Scott mentioned that we had done 2 cycles of this. We were afraid kind of at first that we would only be able to fund 2, maybe 3 projects a fiscal year, but we've luckily been able to do 5 each fiscal year for a total of 10 projects. You do have to put up the 50% match. This doesn't just have to be cash, it can be in-kind donated materials, labor, combination of all of the above. And these are our 7 priorities. This is what's written on the legislation. This was the goal of the program. And this is also the 7 priorities that we use to rate the funding based on who gets the funding. We have a very fancy scale sheet, I guess is what you would call it, where we rate these programs. So this isn't just, we like this project better, this is going to get funded. We are selecting these based on the funding priorities, and I won't go through each one of these, but you can see those, and I also have some handouts for the end here. These are the ineligible projects. Our main focus is making sure that we aren't funding private roads. We want to make sure that we're funding these county roads that need the dollars the most and can do the most improvements. One of the main requirements of the grant is that someone is trained, and I know that Scott touched on this, and this year we had a very successful training cycle with over 100 people trained on this program. It is a requirement that you go through this training before you're eligible to apply for this. We did have a few counties this last cycle that did not go through the training, and you can see that when they send in their applications. The ones that have are applying for the things that are covered under the 7 priorities, and they've received this training that University of Arkansas and the Nature Conservancy has helped us with, and it's actually improving the program. We are working towards being able to train everyone, whether they apply before or after the deadline, but we're seeing that those that are trained before the deadline are putting together better applications and covering the priorities covered by the program. I think we've included a couple pictures of the trainings. Again, you can see, I know these are just backs of heads, but they were very successful trainings. Once you go to one, you're good for 5 years, so you don't have to do this every year, but you can send different people from your county. It's always good for the judge to go through or have someone appointed to cover. They are provided at no cost, and we do about half of the day in the classroom and then half of the day out in the field looking at roads. So it is very helpful. We also request that counties ask us for pre-site visits. It's good for our staff. Clay with the Nature Conservancy and Brenda, our grants manager at Rural Services, will go out and consult on these projects. Sometimes they'll get there and see that this road really isn't covered by the program, and the judge can take them to many other locations and look at what's the best fit for the county and for the 7 priorities that we're looking to fund through the program. These are a couple more, I believe, construction pictures on some of the projects that we funded. But it is worth noting that all 75 counties in Arkansas are eligible under this program. We do not have a population limit, just as long as they're meeting those 7 priorities. And that's mainly it for me. Again, we just cover the administration of it, so I can talk to you all day about the application or the eligibility requirements. But this is my contact information, my email, and then also Brenda Rao, our grants manager. And again, you don't have to wait until the deadline. If you know someone who could be interested in this program, we'll come out any time of the year. The trainings for the program will start this fall, and I believe we'll wrap up next February. So we'll cover about 6 different locations across the state, and we'll be sending out emails and mail outs ahead of those. So with that, if anyone has any questions for me or for Scott, we're here.
I've got a couple. I guess I should say first, you kind of opened my eyes. I thought the unpaved roads was to get roads paved, and you're not necessarily doing that.
Correct.
Is there a cost per mile on the average of what it takes to do a mile of road? I understand, like in the example you gave us where they built the road up 5 feet, that's obviously going to cost a lot more per mile to do something like that, but is there an average?
That's a good question. I don't know, but I can find out. Usually the areas that this program is designed for, and it's for the counties, county roads for the counties to apply, would be the real troublesome hotspots. So it wouldn't be an average area, it would be pretty steep.
Right.
Let's see, so I think we can guess. So, yeah, but Stone County's was about a half mile, and theirs was about maybe 100,000. And these are just
So
maybe scale.
maybe $200,000, $250,000 a mile
Maybe.
would be a rough estimate.
Yeah,
Yes.
rough estimate for that area.
Hey, have you done any research on the Buffalo River watershed area? Is there an understanding of how many miles of unpaved roads there are in that area?
We have not.
Okay.
So the Nature Conservancy hasn't done an assessment
I
there.
don't know if anybody came from County Judges Association or anything that would have any of those numbers. I don't see anyone speaking up, but I think that'd be interesting to understand some of that. Maybe we could follow up in later meetings, Director, and see if we can get some feedback on exactly how much money, if we could commit to doing, I don't know what's reasonable, 10 miles a year, for example, what would that cost and where we could identify funds. So that brings me to my next question. If I had $150,000 like Director Crow has, can I put that money and earmark it and say, I want this money to be spent in the Buffalo River watershed? Is there a way to do something like that, or would you have to change your rules to accept something in that nature? I mean, if you weren't going to get the donation, obviously you want the donation. So how would you handle something like
I
that?
would have to 100% double check that. I believe there are ways that we can do that. But there might have to be kind of an extension of the rules. Since it is a statewide program, if we're just holding out money to one area, having to make that clear since all 75 counties
Right.
apply.
Well, it was very telling in the graphic that you put up, just the massive amount of silt that's going in from the unpaved roads. And I think that's very important as we move forward to identify those things that are causing the sediment that the nutrients are coming into the river from. Obviously stream bank erosion was number 1, but this is a big number 2.
Sir, if I could add something. I forgot one statistic which is worth sharing. When we did assessments of the watersheds in the rivers that have a forested corridor along the stream, like which the Buffalo mostly has, the roads were contributing 40 to 60% of the total sediment.
So it's even more important in these areas.
Yes.
Right.
But once we get into the more agricultural rivers where all of the lower pasture, all of the lower fields are in pastures, then the stream banks become higher.
Well, I think this is something we definitely need to follow up on as we move forward with this committee to better understand what is needed in this watershed. That's what our task is, to find solutions to some of these problems. And obviously, this is a big problem in the area. And so I think we need to probably have some more meetings, get some people from the County Judges Association that can have some better numbers for us and identify that, and then we can probably start working on ways to fund that.
And I was going to ask, and this may be unfair to Director Crowe, but as they make their contributions, and as I guess the Nature Conservancy receive contributions from private parties, how were you able to funnel that money to specific projects, or did you just, how was that handled? I think that was the question you just got asked, but Scott, did you just provide a grant to the unpaid road programs and then they in turn applied that funded applications that were coming in from that
Correct.
county? Is that right?
Yes, correct. And Alex asked me to mention, as part of the legislation, which is a great part of the whole program because it's very much a partnership effort, there's an advisory committee of all the partners that work on this issue statewide, and they rank the projects. But Game and Fish's contribution and our contribution did not have any restrictions on any particular place. We really just used it. We wanted to get the program started so that we could more broadly show that it was going to be a great statewide benefit.
Just a observation and a comment. Obviously, this is, to me, a model of how government should work for our citizens, and it's without question a win-win-win in all regards. An observation I would have is not related to the Buffalo watershed, but an application that was made close to where I live from a new county judge who is probably not like Judge Nutt in Calhoun County, who's not afraid, but it was a big project, and it seemed to me, because I grew up with this county judge, and he's brand new, that maybe he's a little intimidated by the scope and the scale of what that project, and to the point that, well, we're not going to go that far in. I think just the observation would be that perhaps there's an educational need, and I think Scott mentioned the cost benefit over time to help judges understand that. But you're fighting against a culture of budgets that have been historically been strapped, and people just scrapping by just to make do, and it's hard to break out of that mindset sometimes. So I just an observation, because there was a very good project just really into my driveway, to be honest, but they were a little concerned about hey, we're not really wanting to do this much, but it just seemed to me that might be a challenge for this program going forward, to really work with the county judges to help them understand that the value of the program.
Thanks for sharing that. It's been interesting seeing which counties take advantage of the opportunities. Judge Ellison in Polk County has been a great advocate. Judge Avey in Stone County, the judge in Van Buren County. And I think it's because the ones that have really had some of the intense floods and lots of damage, they're just really focused on trying to do something different. And really the beauty of the program is the quantifying the benefits. And so we just believe that those will speak for themselves. And that hopefully as more and more county judges see the benefit and the economic benefit, it'll spread to the rest of the counties. Yeah.
And to be clear, it's not a road that I travel on. So, to be clear, it's just one close to my home.
Yep. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Scott. It was an excellent presentation, you and Alex. And I guess the only question I have is, as a action committee, and with some funding now available, I'd be interested to see how we can appropriately support the program. Obviously, appreciate Director Preston providing you, Alex, to come over and share this program with us. He is interested in the economic vitality of that area, even though he doesn't physically sit on this committee. He and Kane Webb obviously have interest in making sure that what we do supports strong economic development initiatives as well as tourism dollars in the area. So, and I know road and travel affects tourism at times as well. So I guess I'd like to know if there's any next steps. I've had communications, I believe, with Center Urban, had some interest in this program. I know other representatives, perhaps maybe it's time to reach out to them and see if there's something that would be appropriate, or perhaps with, on what our next step could be to help perhaps meet with the county judges or encourage them. And I don't know if that's part of the watershed management plan process, might be a recommendation, something that we could do as an action committee to see if we can pull a conversation together to see if maybe at least one of the projects in the upcoming cycle could be focused around the Buffalo watershed in some form or fashion. Not that we want to competitively push someone out of the way, but we do want to make sure that if there's a county judge available and interested, that we could perhaps support that. So I don't know if that's something you entertain, and maybe we can sit down with Director Preston and talk about that. I think that would help. I know the governor is interested in this program, and perhaps will be involved a little bit more directly in the future, but I want to make sure that we also respect the role of the legislature. It sounds like Pennsylvania had such a success that they continue to raise funding in their successful program, and that would be a great replicate. If we could replicate that in Arkansas, I think that would be great. But as you mentioned, the idea of federal, state, local, private partnerships really makes a huge difference in delivery of projects. Plus, I think the ownership, the counties really run these businesses, and we want to make sure the counties make the right decisions or have the tools to make decisions to improve water quality as well as their roads in their counties. So thank you. But is there any other information that we should glean from this at this point? Or
Madam Chair, I've got a couple of questions.
oh, I'm sorry, I missed you down there.
And I hate to put y'all on the spot with this, but
You always do this, Shelby.
I know, sorry.
You're on the committee.
I would say he might be sharing a little.
I think one of your slides, Scott, maybe had a red star in maybe Searcy County. So here's kind of the question is, did we have any applicants from Boone, Newton, Searcy, or Marion County in the 2-year run that has been done? Okay. And then another question, kind of follow up, in any of those counties, did they send their road and bridge foreman or the judge to any of the training, to take advantage of that training from any of those counties in the watershed? It seemed to me that would be just a real simple thing we could do, is outreach to those county officials that are in that watershed and make sure that I'm sure y'all did this. I know that they probably got that letter, put it on their desk, and then did like I often do, which is to prioritize, and it got lower priority. So I wonder if maybe we could just do something special from the committee, which would be easy, and maybe elicit an application from one of those areas that would be in the watershed. All right, next question. Let me make sure I understand. If there was a national park road in the park that's unpaved, would it be eligible under the program?
This is, I believe that the language is directed to the counties. So if it's a county road that the county is maintaining and managing, then that would be eligible. But if the counties did not have any involvement, and a lot of it is as the county judges, just as they're, I think, one county had 1,600 miles of unpaved roads, and they had, you know, a $700,000 budget to deal with all those roads. So it's really directed at helping them with some hot spots.
Okay. I kind of suspected that might be the case, but I was curious about that. And then just finally a comment, particularly on the low water crossings and the susceptibility that we have in that part of the state to flash flooding. I think this is also a public safety issue. You know, we had a loss of life up in Madison County from a low water crossing, and it's just, you know, it's a sad thing. And when you showed the slide with that elevated structure, I gotta believe that that might have saved a life if we'd have had that in, you know, in that particular county. So I think it's a public safety issue as much as it is an environmental and transportation issue. So thank you.
Thank you. If I could follow up with one comment, additional comment. It's not, the Division of Rural Services has set up such a great process and infrastructure. It's really easy to just drop funding or drop interest into it. And it doesn't, so many of these areas are so obviously a priority, it would not need a whole watershed assessment. County judges and technical staff could just tour around some of the hot spots and really identify a subset of places to start work on. The technical committee, and this gets to your comment, Director Holland, really provides the support for the county judges that are interested and just need somebody to work with them a little bit. So that can be us from the Nature Conservancy or one of the other partners.
Well, I certainly appreciate everything that you're doing in this initiative. We're concerned with the Buffalo River watershed area. So I guess my question to you, Alex, is could you report back to us if we could find funding to put into your program, could we direct it to be used only in the Buffalo River watershed, or what, or people could designate those monies? I think, because I think that's something that we're very interested in.
And then we'll also, we're working on the training schedule right now, and as soon as we get that, we can do that to y'all, and we'll notify all of the judges.
Yeah,
If y'all want to go to secondary.
Yeah, I think reaching out to the county judges in those areas and their road foremans and saying, you really need to come and get this training so we can move forward, yeah.
Okay, we'll get both of those.
Thank you very
Well, we
much.
know sediment does play a large role in our water quality parameters, so I appreciate all the work you're doing across the state, not just in the Buffalo watershed, but we specifically today are focusing on that, so thank you. And Scott, I wanted to ask you one quick question. You mentioned early in your presentation, this is kind of off topic, but you mentioned that you work closely with private dollar or donors regarding conservation easements, and that may be a topic of future interest to hear more about what easements have been established in the watershed and how private donors might participate more fully as we go forward in our programs and our actions. So I might invite you back at a future meeting to talk a little bit if you're interested about this whole conservation easement program, which I know is a separate program from unpaved roads. So if that's something we could talk about offline, I'd be interested in hearing more about how that program's set up and how we as government agencies might be able to leverage other dollars that might be available on easements with that to inform either farmers or other landowners that might be interested within the watershed or perhaps outside the watershed that wants to protect the water for their use. So, thank you for that work.
Thanks for asking about that. That's probably the other great low-hanging fruit in improving water quality, since there are, hundreds and hundreds and maybe thousands of landowners that chose to recreate there and own property who would be interested in protecting the streams and the rivers. And I left some information for you all afterwards and anybody else who's interested on some example easements from us and the Buffalo River Foundation, and then some of our nature preserves that we both own. So there's some good examples there.
And we know that is an often used best practice when we look at impaired water bodies, when we look at how to address protection of those water qualities. Often it's easements are very beneficial, or buffers to avoid perhaps runoff of nutrients or other sediments that can contribute to impaired water quality. So I appreciate that. That is just something we can talk about ahead, maybe as a best practice that we can encourage just due to the interest. So thanks again for both presentations, and look forward to that in the future. I'm going to ask my folks to raise the lights because we might all take naps up here if you don't. No, I'm teasing. But we will try to get the lights back up. They're a little bit slow to respond. That has nothing to reflect on our agency, by the way. We are very efficient in our but we, as the new energy office is now located here, perhaps, we have replaced some of our lights with LED lights, so we hope they're a little quicker to action as we are as well at the agency these days. So we're looking, at least we know we're saving energy more effectively with these LED systems. Anyway, so with that, I wanted to move quickly over to Dr. Smith, and he had a few thoughts about the Swim Beach program and how that is going, and particularly maybe of interest to those that recreate in the Buffalo watershed.
Very good. Could you go ahead and pull up the presentation entitled Swim Beach Program? While she's doing that, I just want to recognize two of my staff who are here. Mr. Tom Jones is one of our senior environmental health specialists. He's also a Board of Health member, and he is very familiar with our Swim Beach program. Depend on him a lot when we're dealing with swim beach issues. And then I'd also like to introduce Dr. Richard McMullen, who just recently joined us as an environmental health scientist, and he has assisted me with some of the data presentation for the E. coli monitoring of the Buffalo River. Go ahead and advance to the first slide. Our Swim Beach program doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the Buffalo River, but it will help give a little bit of background for our E. coli monitoring. We monitor 130 swim beaches throughout Arkansas. Next slide, please. We do this in partnership with a number of organizations. We don't do it all on our own. It's a pretty extensive network. You've already advanced to the next slide, so that's okay. Go ahead. What is exactly a swim beach? Well, the definition in our rules and regs are that any bathing place together with buildings and appurtenances, if any, and the water and land areas used in connection therewith as a natural pond, lake, stream, or other body of water which is operated for a fee or any other compensation, or which is openly advertised as a place for bathing or swimming for the public. This definition does not apply to swimming pools, and it doesn't apply to the Buffalo National River, although a lot of people swim there. Go ahead to the next slide. This is just to go over basically what we do in terms of our monitoring. For E. coli, we use E. coli as an indicator organism for enteric bacterial contamination. We do grab samples collected on monthly intervals. Any of those samples that exceed 126 E. coli density colony forming units per 100 mils require beach closure. And then we require 2 consecutive samples for 2 days that are below the threshold before we open the swim beach. Next slide. There's a number of challenges to operating a swim beach and keeping it in compliance. One is flooding. When you get a lot of water runoff, it tends to increase the E. coli counts. Go ahead, next slide. Wildlife definitely contribute, and Tom has dealt with lots and lots of goose poop through the years, and these can bring a swim beach out of compliance with E. coli levels exceeding the 126. And next slide. Although we do monitor for E. coli as an indicator organism, it is not the only issue with regard to swim beaches that indicate safety or biological safety. I know we tend to focus on those numbers quite a bit, but there are a number of other factors. They include the clarity of the water, flooding, flow rates, debris, low water levels. All those things can contribute to elevated concentrations of enteric organisms, and will ultimately contribute to exceedances in the E. coli levels. Go ahead to the next slide. In terms of laboratory analysis, just to get a sense of how that works, once the sample is collected, it requires generally, it's got to go to the lab, it has to be cultured and grown, and then the results are reported back. So those results can take a week to come back. So we go ahead and start resampling the water even before we've gotten the results of the previous sample back, because we're looking for 2 consecutive samples that are 126 or below. But because of that delay in getting results back, it can be 2 weeks or more before we can get 2 consecutive samples that are compliant. And that's always a challenge in dealing with our swim beach operators, because during the summer months they want their beach open right away, especially if it's before a big weekend like Memorial Day or Labor Day or 4th of July. Next slide. Just to give you some idea of a typical season, last season our sampling began in April and extended through October. All 130 sites were sampled. 615 samples were collected. Of these, 58 or 9% exceeded the regulatory limits of greater than 126 E. coli per 100 mils. That is background to the monitoring data for E. coli, the Buffalo National River. I need to point out that the Buffalo National River is not a swim beach, and being a river, these standards don't exactly apply to it. With a river, of course, once you take a sample, that water is gone. We've used the same cutoff in looking at it just to get a sense of levels of enteric contamination. And if you could pull up the next slide, I just have a few slides on that. Go ahead to the first slide. Thank you. The National Forest Department and the Department of Health both sample for E. coli. The National Forest Department collects more frequently, though, 4 times per month from 3 different locations. And so the data I'll be presenting, for the most part, are their data. And the time frame we're looking at is March of 2013 through the end of April of this year. Go ahead with the next slide. This is just to tell you where those sites are. That's Arkansas, and the next one will show you more specifically where these sites are. 309 is actually on the Big Creek River, and the other 2 sites are right above and below its confluence with the Buffalo River. Next slide. A total during this 4-year period of time, you can see a total of 750 samples there, divided between the 3 sites. The average E. coli concentration in terms of colony-forming units per 100 mils, you can see there, similar at the 3 sites. Standard deviations are pretty wide. The geometric mean is below that 126 threshold. The number of exceedances you can see there, similar for each of the sites, actually a little higher for the one on the Big Creek. And then percent exceedances you can see there, 13, 18, and 13%. Go ahead with the next slide. This just shows the E. coli counts over time graphically, and you can see you've got fairly low levels, and then you've got these spikes These spikes generally relate to rainfall. When we get excessive rainfall, you'll have a spike in number of E. coli. What we don't see is a clear pattern of increasing or decreasing over time, and the patterns are similar at the 3 sites where those collections are done. In terms of analyses, what we've done is looked at the hydrographic flow regimes and we categorized them for each of these samples as the river was either at base flow, rising, or falling at the time of sampling. 592 samples were collected during base flow, and there were 29 exceedances. 41 samples were collected during rising hydrographs with 27 exceedances, and 117 samples were collected during falling hydrographs with 56 exceedances. So overall, 66% of the rising samples and 48 of the falling samples exceeded that 126. And when the river was at base flow, only 5% of samples exceeded the 126. And I think that's my last slide. Yes. I know that was quick, but if there are any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them or ask one of my experts to come up and give input.
I do have a question. I think there's some other questions. I'll let you start, Shelby.
Dr. Smith, I noticed on that last slide, those sample dates were really kind of spanning well in advance of the CNH farm that's on Big Creek. Would it be possible to go back to that slide?
Sure, I'm sorry. And you also have these presentations as handouts. Yes, the testing period.
Yes, that's, thank you. So if I have a dim memory, but it seems that farm went into operation in, was it 15 or 16? And so some of those spikes are occurred before that became operational.
I don't know.
I don't have really history, but Ryan was checking.
2012.
Yeah.
The farm went in 2012?
Well, I'm forgetful. I apologize.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, this monitoring is primarily since that farm.
Okay.
Is that right, Ryan? Is that what you were?
Yeah, so that's 2013 right on that one, right?
Was it constructed in 12 or operational in 12, or do you remember? I'd have to get the history out on that, but I know there's been a
We
number.
get operational in 12.
12, okay. Thank you.
We didn't have a reason to be sampling before that.
Okay, thank you. I was trying to understand that graph better, and I apologize for the bad memory. I was thinking that was just like a couple of years ago. So.
Yeah, I believe that there's been sampling what would be considered up gradient as well as the down gradient locations with interest in what you're working on is also in concert with what the University of Arkansas was looking at as well as they study the farm. But that's interesting. I guess I was curious if we do have a fairly robust set of data now, it seems, after 4 years of monitoring, but and seeing the historical cycles is very interesting to me. Obviously, we're looking at it as well on some of the tributaries, as I mentioned, Mill Creek, but I was interested, do we have relative data on other rivers that we could see if this phenomenon of spikes during storm events is typical of a forested river, or if that's just more unique to the Buffalo, or do you know if we have any data like that in Arkansas?
I don't have data from other rivers, but that would be typical, and that's really what we see. That corresponds with the experience in our swim beach program. Again, swim beaches are different than rivers, but whenever we have a big rain, that's when we're most likely to see a spike in our E. coli counts. Now, there are lots of other things that can cause that. If we've had a flock of geese or a septic system that's gone bad or something of that sort. Tom, did you want to comment on?
One of our closest representatives that would help on what you're talking about might be Long Pool, which is on paint. And we could pull a history, and compare to that.
Helpful to us to know what that is, and I may want to talk to some of our counterparts, as I know we have a number, Sarah, we may want to look and see if other states have data. I think Ryan has.
I just want to correct something. So that is about, where it starts is about the time of starting of application. About 13 is about the time of starting application. Right?
No, the facility was probably built at that time. Application didn't begin until December of 2013.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe the early samples were prior to application in the, as we know, it's an agricultural area though, so we know there's other nutrient application, be it commercial fertilizers or other poultry litter that's used in the, besides geese and feral hogs. And perhaps cattle and, I don't want to go there, but I mean, there's all kinds of opportunity for, as well as, I will mention tourism, to offer their contributions. So we just want to make sure that we're getting the best science we can and understand it, and I think you make a good point. I know the National Park Service has been monitoring themselves on some of the trips, and we've taken some of that data into consideration as we look at our data. Is that right, Sarah, I believe? So in terms of their streams, and do some postings of whether, based on data. We have talked to them about their protocol of when they post and when they remove the signs. It's not as consistent, I believe, in the protocol that you described. I believe they may just leave the signs up once they have a exceedance, and that's something the public may need. We're working with the Park Service on what's an appropriate, I guess what's an appropriate time period to be able to let the public know that the water perhaps is safe to enter.
I wouldn't attempt to utilize our protocols for swim beaches on a river. Now we have used that 126 threshold on other rivers when we had situations, a non-swim beach situation, but in a river, the water is flowing, and so as soon as you take the sample, it's no longer relevant. It's more of a give you an idea of how things are going over time. For a swim beach, it makes sense to, once you have an exceedance, to close the beach until it comes back to below threshold. But when you've got moving water, it wouldn't make sense to interpret it in the same way.
I think that's helpful for public consumption and education, so thank you for that.
I think what we are seeing though is in general, the Big Creek and Buffalo at these sites, and probably true for other rivers, are going to be more likely to have enteric contamination when there's been heavy rainfall, increased turbidity, and then when the river's back to its baseline flow, it's less likely.
Dr. Smith, I think one of your staff was suggesting Long Pool as an alternative sample site. That's not a swim beach, right? Even though they collect a fee there for day use?
Yes, it is.
It is?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And again, these sites, many other sites could have been chosen. The advantage of having these 3 sites is that we've collected data now for 4 years, and if we see changes, it's not just due to where we sample.
But I believe it. We will share this data with Kane Webb, because I know he's quite interested in this information. So thank you. Director Webb will be interested to see the work you're doing and the fact that you are looking at protecting our citizens and even our tourism as we go forward.
Maybe when we do our flotation, let's do it not right after a heavy rain.
Okay. That's true. I was going to make a comment that perhaps most people aren't in the stream immediately following a storm, but then there are those kayakers that do enjoy a fast paced flow stream. I might say their safety might be at higher risk for other situations beyond E. coli at that point, but we should protect them nonetheless. So wanted to make sure that we move on into, and thank you so much, Dr. Smith. That was very helpful for me to understand how you evaluate our waterways for use of the public. Buffalo River Watershed Management Plan update. I'm going to turn it to you, Director Holland, to introduce Tony, and then we'll do a wrap-up as soon as he concludes with his quarterly report.
Sure. This is Tony Ramick. He's from our Arkansas Natural Resources Commission. Tony heads up the non-point source group over there and is an expert in the watershed management plans, and he's going to present to you our report.
Chair Keogh and Holland and committee members, I think that you have passed out, or it's been passed out. The title is Buffalo River Watershed Management Plan. Will be the notes I'll go over and try to pretty quickly. But on March the 30th, we had our second Buffalo River Watershed Management Plan meeting. And as we all know, the Water Plan Management Plan is a voluntary, non-regulatory management plan that includes 9 key elements that EPA suggests that we include. At that time, there was approximately 65 folks in attendance, which was very diverse, including farmers, landowners, political representatives, individuals from agricultural, conservation, recreation, and other interest groups. The groups met. The way that we do is we go over the previous meeting, the information that was collected from the previous meeting, and just recap that discussion. Then we broke into 2 large groups, and those groups were divided, if you will, into agricultural, commerce, local communities. And then the second group was tourism, recreation, and environmental interest. And the emphasis and the main point of the second meeting was on management practices to address water quality concerns or issues. Now, it's interesting for these 2 groups, during the breakout, you were allowed to go from one group to the other. So you wasn't stuck in one group. Following that discussion, FTN, which is the contractor that ANRC has for this project, discussed preliminary analysis that was conducted from information and data that they had searched out that encompassed over 30 years. Now it is, we need to make note that the data that has been collected over 30 years is not continuous data, nor is it on the same time scale or frame. But it is what it is. We have to use what we have. Some of the things that were considered, that they considered, was index biotic integrity, which is basically fish, stream condition index, which is an index for macroinvertebrates, water quality measurements here again over 30 years, trend analysis over 10-year periods, NRCS, USDA NRCS resource assessments that they have conducted. And then we also looked at the basins and subbasins, the percentage of carbonate rock, or some of the geology, if you will. In looking at these, there was basically 6 criteria, which was relative to the sampling and the sector that it was sampled, that was considered for initial ranking of subwatersheds. Now, ranking subwatersheds, there's 2 kind of ways to look at it. You can say, well, let's rank those and what would be the low-hanging fruit that would take the least amount of work to do, or you can look at that as what would take a little more intense measures to deal with. Here again, this is not a prioritizing of the most pollutant, less pollutant. This is based upon the information that we had. There were 8 subwatersheds that kind of rose to the top, if you will. The top 4 was Mill Creek, Calf Creek, Bear Creek, and Brush Creek, all using the same criteria. There was some interest of the group that was there about Big Creek and that subwatershed, and questions about how it ranked. And it was analyzed using the same process as all the others. It did not achieve the highest rankings. There were some stakeholders and others requested that maybe we look at dissolved oxygen or incorporate dissolved oxygen, E. coli. We said that we would try to do that. We have tried to be amenable to what the stakeholders would like, but quite frankly, we're getting to a point now, based upon the contract and the contract amount, we're no longer going to be able to keep doing initial analysis. We had a fixed amount on this contract to get this completed, and we're just about, based upon our time frame and budgetary consideration, we're about to get overextended based upon our time frame. So we're not going to be able to probably do any additional work that's outside the contract. The information that was gathered at Jasper will be integrated with other information that the previous collected. And our next watershed meeting is scheduled for June 8th. It's going to be in Marshall. We are still on schedule for the watershed management plan. The watershed management plan is scheduled to be developed in the first or the initial draft completed by March 1st of 18. And that sounds like a long time, but you have to understand that we really need to wind this thing up, and we're trying to stay on task to end it by the end of January, no later, because we will have to have time to go through the plan itself, make sure that all the elements have been addressed and met before it goes to EPA. EPA does not approve or disapprove the plan. They either accept it or not accept it, basically accepting, saying that the 9 elements were addressed. As we have tried to reiterate multiple times, it's a voluntary plan, it's a non-regulatory plan. What we're trying to do is identify areas, identify where additional conservation measures may be put in place that could assist those stakeholders within that watershed. I would like to report on some additional work that has come to light and what we're going to do. Arkansas Natural Resources has recently secured a project and secured a contract to do a soil and water assessment tool, which is a model, a short SWOT. There are many models that is out there. We are not necessarily saying this is the best or the worst, but in the previous watershed management plans that we have developed, this is the tool that we have used. And in an effort to remain consistent with all the other watershed management plans, we're going to use this tool again and integrate it into this one. SWOT basically, quickly, is a river basin scale model. It quantifies the impact of land management practices in large complex watersheds. Basically, it predicts the effective management decisions on water, sediment, nutrients, and pesticide yields within a reasonable accuracy on large engaged river basins. The components that go into the model is weather, surface runoff, percolation, evapotranspiration, transmission losses, ponds, reservoir storage, crop growth and irrigation, groundwater flow, reach routing, nutrient and pesticide loading, and water transfer. As information is put into the model, it's validated, and then we do runs, if you will, to see how accurate the model is based upon actual data. It can be said about models, and I have said this myself, a model is only good as the information that you put in. It is a snapshot in time. You can't take all the data and say, okay, it just correlates to this. It's snapshots in time. But we have used this in previous watersheds to help us identify where conservation measures may be most appropriate or most helpful. Made that as quick as I possibly could in the essence of time.
Tony, thank you. I appreciate all the work that you've been doing. You've been working very closely with FTN, and I appreciate you getting the SWOT model set up, funding for it. I think that's an important part. Tell us a little bit more. We've got about 8 or 9, I think, other watershed management plans in place across the state of Arkansas. Are we doing this one any different than we did any of those?
No. We are staying consistent. Each watershed management plan has a 9, has gone through the same process, including the SWOT model. We're doing this one no different than we've done the others. That's one thing that we have made sure, quite frankly, pride ourselves on, is the consistency of the work that we do. No more, no less. There's always going to be discussion acceptance or non-acceptance of what the management plan is or isn't. But what the management plan does, it gives you a starting point. It's not the end all. It's not when you finish it, okay, we're done, we walk away, and we're through. It's the beginning. It's just a starting point. And anytime we're going to implement or do anything, we have to have a place to start. And in this effort, this is trying to identify some areas maybe we think we could start in. And as I've said before, in our first meeting, the watershed management plan will allow us and allow the stakeholders, groups and organizations to possibly leverage funding for conservation in that watershed. NRCS, USDA NRCS is frankly using our watershed management plans now for a lot of initiatives they have. Mississippi River Basin Initiative, National Water Quality Incentive Program, some of the EQIP work, regional conservation partnerships. So it's not just a document, it's just not some paper that goes on the shelf. It needs to be usable, and thus far, the management plans we have developed are usable and have been very beneficial. And we hope that this will be the same.
Thank you. I think Dr. Smith's got some questions.
Just to, wasn't quite clear, the stakeholders you requested that dissolved oxygen and E. coli water quality parameters be included in the rankings. Will you be going back and doing that?
Some of that preliminary work has been done, where data is available. And you have to realize that we had a starting point at any point from 1985 to 2015. There was some criticism of that, but we were looking at complete data sets. And so that's the range that we looked at. I'm sure some of the data that maybe you presented, I don't know if FDN was able to secure that or not. I don't know.
I just want to encourage if you, I guess I'd be one of the stakeholders who would be very interested in that as well, because that is a parameter that we use in looking at human safeties.
And I know dissolved oxygen is near and dear to our fishermen's and game and fish operations. So appreciate that. Thank you, Tony. I think, I really do appreciate the professionalism that your team has offered in this process, as well as the approach that you're taking to evaluate this. It's important to the governor, and it's important, I think, to all of us that this fit Arkansas and it be based on science that can be respected beyond our boundaries of Arkansas. So thank you so much for that work. With that, those are our special reports. We had probably a little bit extra in our agenda. You've been very patient today. Thank you for sticking with us a few extra minutes and for your presentation, Dr. Smith. It was excellent. Just to wrap up, obviously a few next steps. Wanted to make sure I will follow up with Director Webb about the float trip if you have interest in that. We will be following up, if you can share with me those communication director contacts. We'll be having some follow-up with them between now and the next meeting. Those of you that can, or your staff, we encourage you to attend that next meeting. I believe it was June 8th. Is that right, Tony? Did I get that right? Of the watershed management plan. I believe there was some interest in us getting some information about the unpaved roads program, specifically about dedicating funding toward the watershed. And so as soon as we receive that information, we'll distribute that to each of you so that you're aware of that, and perhaps be able to follow up on the recommendation, Shelby, that you had about forming either a letter or perhaps a consultation with either the Association of Counties or those state representatives, bring those judges together to see if we have, particularly those that might have gone through training. So I might add to the request, if you can specify if you have any of the county officials that have been certified in those respective counties in the watershed. I know it's a pretty broad county range, but I might ask of that also. If you could share that with us, Alex, and just get back to us if there's any specific county judges that we might want to sit down and have a conversation with, or send a letter to say, make them aware that we might have some funding if they're so interested in initiating a project. I know the National Park Service has a number of their own projects that they're doing, and we continue to want to reach out to them as well. And they did present at the last meeting. So those are the notes I have for next steps. I'll take any other thoughts. I think you have another, did you have another next step that we have on here? Oh, you did. You wanted to address our charter, and I skipped
Right.
over that. I apologize.
We were looking back over some of the documents in the governor's memorandum, and we realized that when we wrote our mission statement, we left a key piece of that out. And so what I'd like to do is, at the end of our mission statement, the president says to protect the Buffalo National River as a source of scenic beauty, high water quality, unique aquatic species and habitat with exceptional recreational uses, and the coordination of resources within the Buffalo River watershed. What we'd like to add to that is, while preserving agriculture productivity and the livelihood of farm families in the watershed, because the governor was specific in his memorandum that agriculture be included in that. I think it's appropriate that we add that to our mission statement. So I would make that as a motion.
I say a second. Any discussion? May I make a friendly edit to that? Perhaps we want to say the agricultural productive and livelihood of our communities and farm families in the watershed. Is that acceptable to those? So we want the livelihood of our full community as well as our farm families to be protected. So, all right, well, let's add livelihood of communities and farm families in the watershed, therefore speaking to the county judges' interest as well as our mayors. So with that, I'll take a motion. We have a motion, a second. Without objection, I'll take a vote. All those in favor of modifying the charter as discussed?
Do we have any specific procedures for changing bylaws? I know that, do our bylaws have any provisions for how we change our bylaws?
I don't believe we have any fully established bylaws so much as the charter that we adopted as a committee. So I think that's a good point of order. Sarah, do you recall anything that we discussed in the meeting? Okay. I think we're safe to move forward just through a simple vote to adopt a modification, assuming there's no objection. I don't want to do anything over objection of anybody else. I know we're missing Director Webb, but we'll consult with him to make sure he's on board. So, all those in favor? All in favor? Any opposed? All right, well, it'll stand revised. And I appreciate that. I apologize for not taking care of that during the executive discussion. Any further next steps? I have one invitation or something I participated in, and I didn't include it in my report. It's not specific to the Buffalo watershed, but it is about water quality. This month, in fact, last week, I believe it was, I participated in a press event at the Little Rock Zoo, which I believe is really a statewide zoo in many ways. At that zoo, we opened with the director of the Little Rock Zoo and director of Central Arkansas Water, a water extreme journey maze for children, and it's on water education. And it's a maze. It sits near the elephants, if you find the elephants in the zoo, but you will be able to take your children or yourself through a maze, somewhat of an educational opportunity as a drop of water and how it flows through the water, and it takes you through the process of understanding how water is important, water supply is important, but also how water quality is protected. And as I spoke to about 500 children that were there at the zoo, they call this yellow fever at the zoo because that's when all the school buses arrive in May. So they're experiencing yellow fever. You didn't know we had they call it yellow fever month. And we had about 500 children, and we explained it as historically, or I guess in the past, the Greeks and Romans looked to gods to protect their water, but we know we've moved forward in our understanding, and we know that in fact our water quality is protected largely by all of us, right? And so we explained that with the children, and so No longer do we have to rely on Neptune or Poseidon, that we can rely on ourselves, hopefully, to be aware we happen to have an abundance of water